Many of them went back to Mexico. Many of those who didn't go back to Mexico reduced or stopped their remittances because they didn't have the money. Mexico suddenly, starting in 2006, had the worst of all conceivable consequences of this crisis. Millions of people coming back with no work, no prospect of work, and a country collapsing because its major income from outside, remittances, were drying up. These people in Mexico, coming back, in a society reeling from the loss of the remittances, is a failed country. It can't function. That is why you read, and believe me, you see only the tip of the iceberg. You read about whole police stations in wars with other police stations. Drug gangs. The reason drug gangs are enormous in that country is it's the only job there is. For millions of young men and women coming back, that's their job opportunity. It's that or nothing. Absolutely nothing. And of course, therefore, they are fighting for turf, they are fighting for the shrinking opportunities that too many people are trying to get in on. The police are immediately corrupted by all of this, and you have a society which, for large parts of Mexico, makes the country unlivable, ungovernable. It is a concentrated effect of this global crisis happening in one particular country. It's not the only country, but it's an example of how the crisis, which comes out of an uneven developing global capitalism, also impacts very unevenly, producing complete chaos. But because this is an important country, because it's on the border of the United States, that problem is becoming an American problem. There are possibilities of huge waves of immigrants, desperate, coming across to survive. And where will they be put? Same problem that happens in other parts of the world when they have mass migration of desperate people. There'll have to be camps set up for them. Where? In Texas, in Arizona, and New Mexico, where the people are real eager for that, as you well know. So you're looking at potentials for social crises and horrific experiences. Unless something is done, and there's nothing on the horizon that looks to be done, this is a situation that is already beyond words in its horror. I mean, I don't know how many of you follow it, but they're discovering mass graves every week, once here or there. Police people are killing large numbers of others. Others are killing each other and the police, and everybody's for sale. It's a remarkable situation. And of course, it fuels in this country already hyped up anti-immigrant feeling. This will be stoked some more by these images of horror presented to an American public, which has not been explained how it happened, and the role of the United States in making all of this occur. Okay. So the bottom line of all of this is the crisis is continuing. There really is no let-up. The short period, roughly from March 2009 to roughly April 2010, when bank stocks did a little bit better and the stock market did better, that has flattened out. That's not continuing. One of the reasons people talk about a so-called double dip, that is, we had the collapse in 2008 until around March of 2009, then a recovery of the banks and the stock market for about a year, and now that's flattening out, and the fear is it's going to go down again. A second or double dip in 2010-11, similar to the one that really went down in 2008. The fear of that, and by the way, it's not just an economic fear, it's a cultural and psychological fear. It's one thing to have a collapse explode on the American people, unprepared as they were. It's another thing to have them go through a horrible time, tell them that there's a recovery, and then have the hope of that dashed. That's very dangerous politically. Not dealing with this crisis has already proven itself to be dangerous. Mr. Obama came in on a wave of excitement against the Bush administration, in which the Bush administration was blamed heavily for the economic crisis that was crashing all around us in 2008. And Mr. Obama, in November of 2008, was the candidate everybody looked to offset what Bush had done. Mr. Obama, like Mr. Bush, had every economic advice imaginable, every incentive to have that advice serve well, to do the things that would make you politically popular. Mr. Bush's advisors could not save him or the Republicans from being blown out of the water in 2008. Mr. Obama, with his advisors, including quite a few carried over from the earlier regime, had every incentive again to do everything possible to make this crisis at least seriously look like it was being overcome, or else risk that the crisis that blew Mr. Bush away would become the crisis that blows Mr. Obama away. With all his advisors and all his incentive, he couldn't do it. The power of this crisis is much larger and runs much deeper than anything these political leaders can do. And the truth of it is, they know it. They know it. I know many of the advisors of Mr. Obama, and they know very well, and they're very frightened about what's going on. They do all these things, and then they cross their fingers right behind their backs and hope like hell it works. And what the election showed them is, in the first 2 years, they bombed. It didn't. And they don't know at all what they're facing now. And part of what you see with the Federal Reserve is an action desperate, as you'll see in a minute, to try to keep this situation from spinning out of control. Okay. Last thing by way of introduction. The elections, since a number of you asked me to say something about them. A couple of things. 40% of the eligible voters in this country voted. In other words, 60% didn't. I think that's a very crucial number you should never forget. 60% of the American people didn't vote. Since many of the elections were quite close, then basically it's 20% on one side and 20% on the other that decided most elections. Give or take 20 on one, give or take 20 on the other. Number two, the election is a spectacle in this country of something which I would also urge you to think about, which has always struck me since I'm an economist, the following. If the two biggest dimensions of this economic crisis are unemployment and home foreclosures, the dramatic experience of millions of our fellow citizens losing their jobs and millions of our fellow citizens losing their homes, let's remember who produces unemployment and who forecloses homes. First, unemployment. Unemployment was 7 million in December 2007, the official beginning of the current year. It's now 15.5. So we got an extra 8+ million people lost their job over the 3 years of this economic crisis. Out of the 8 million, 500,000, roughly, maybe 600,000, were people who were fired from a government job, a federal government job, a state government job, a local. A local teacher, a prison guard at the state prison, a road worker who takes tolls, a inspector of something for a government office. The other 7.5 million people who became unemployed were fired by a private capitalist employer. That's how they became unemployed. No politician did that. No political leader did that. Private capitalist employers produced the overwhelming bulk of the unemployment that we focus on as a key sign of this crisis. Let's turn then to foreclosure. Who forecloses? Private bank corporations, private hedge fund operators, private investment banks. The people who get thrown out of their houses get thrown out because a private enterprise goes to court to proceed against them and have the sheriff chuck their stuff on the street. Not politicians. The genius of American capitalism it's much better at this than in other countries, has been to cultivate in our population a knee-jerk reaction. If the economy is in terrible shape, get angry at the politician. If I were a businessman in the United States, I would be smiling with joy at this situation. I kick you, and you're angry at somebody over there. I kick you again, and you get even angrier at that person over there. Private capitalists unemploy us, evict us, and we get angry at politicians, furious at them, furious at the government. The government is doing it to us. No, it isn't. But we believe that. And so we throw out the rascals from office and bring in the next crew. And if we're not happy 2 years later, we chuck them out again and bring in the same crew we threw out 2 years ago. And instead of saying, isn't that silly, isn't that irrational? It isn't silly and it isn't irrational. It comes out of a culture that has trained the American people to see the problem in the state, in the political realm, thereby kind of preventing the rage and anger to be directed where you might otherwise expect it would go first.